Good morning to everyone. My name is Simona Barbu. I'm a policy officer with FANSA, and I welcome you today. Thank you for joining us on this important debate. I will begin with a few technicalities, just a few details to remind everyone that this is a presentation mode webinar, so we will welcome your questions in the Q&A section. We are also recording it, and we will make the registration, recording, available on our website later on. And lastly, we are also curious to know where you are joining us from today. So if you would like, please write to us in the chat your location where you are listening in from. So today's debate, it is titled Sustainable and Safe Housing for People Fleeing the War in Ukraine. What can the Safe Homes Initiative offer? It is organized in the framework of the Housing Solutions Platform, the HSP in its short name. It is an initiative, a partnership between FANSA, the Foundation Abbé Pierre in France, and Housing Europe. HSP is an expertise-driven initiative working to identify, debate, and promote innovative solutions for affordable housing in Europe. So as part of the HSP debate series, today we will focus on the situation of people fleeing Ukraine and the housing solutions available to them. As many in the audience may know, adequate housing for asylum seekers and refugees remains difficult across Europe, and experiences of homelessness among people in search of protection in Europe are witnessed as well. FANSA has been working on the relation between migration and homelessness for a long while, and today we want to look at the situation of people fleeing Ukraine, but also to discuss access to housing for all refugees. So we are organizing this debate in light of the European Commission Safe Homes Initiative, which was launched in July this year with the aim to ensure housing for Ukrainian refugees. And our objectives for today are firstly to get a better understanding of the initiative. And secondly, we want to discuss about possible long-term solutions for housing refugees in Europe and how we can move beyond private accommodation, which has been used primarily in recent months. So to do that, we have structured, to achieve our objectives today, we have structured the debate into two panels. The first panel I will moderate myself, and then I will pass over the floor to our FANSA Directive, Frank Spinewin, who will chair the second panel. So I will start without further delay, presenting our speakers for the first panel, where we will learn more about the Safe Homes Initiative. And we will begin with a presentation from the European Commission, which is represented today by Angelique Petritz, a policy officer at the Legal Pathways and Integration Unit at DG Home. She will tell us more about the Safe Homes Initiative and the work of the Commission around this topic. And then we will get to hear from two good practices that were implemented in Slovakia and in Ireland. The first speaker here will be Lucia Pashkova, who is the coordinator of the web portal Who Will Help Ukraine in Slovakia. And second, we will hear from the colleagues from Ireland, Ara Trianes Salguero, Head of Services, and Elizabeth Peña, Director of Services at Peter McVery Trust, who worked with pledged accommodation for housing Ukrainian refugees. So I think if we have Angelique with us, could you please take over the floor, turn on your camera, and okay, sorry everyone. Lucia, if you are so kind to get us started with your presentation, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's my big pleasure, and also I feel very privileged to be here. And first of all, I have to say that I'm representing a group of people who are only volunteers. So we are not an officially existing NGO. It's just initiative which was built very quickly at the beginning of the war, and we don't have any legal status originally. So this is probably different from many of you who are present here. Just technical, Clotilde, will you share or I should share my presentation?
As you prefer. Do you want me? I'll put it up.
If I have a, please share, I will tell you. So I will speak before it starts. The initiative is called Who Will Help Ukraine, and it basically was already the second initiative that we were doing as volunteers. The first one had to do with COVID, and the initiative was called Who Will Help Slovakia. So the first one and original one. So we were already quite known as in Slovakia, like people were familiar with the brand. So we basically used the brand in the second crisis situation, and this was the war. Next one, please. So when it comes to housing, I would be very practical. I will try to, because I'm sure many of you have been working with this topic, so I will just maybe take out the most important information that we learned within the process. What is the difference is that we have been working with the volunteers from businesses, and that was a great help in many aspects, because we have had professionals in IT, professionals in, I don't know, legal, all these kind of things. So we were quite lucky to have very good quality of people in the volunteer group and use them appropriately. So first learning was that good questionnaires spare you a lot of extra work. When the war started, most of the usual suspects, most of the traditional NGOs ran directly to the borders and were helping there. So we basically offered that we will be like backbone of the system, offering, you know, support for the NGOs and offering for accommodation structure.
Anything.
Sorry? Oh, okay, sorry. So being supporting in those things which were missing by the other organizations in Slovakia, and I can see, Clotilde, what you are doing. I'm not sure whether it should be.
I'm just trying to put it in full screen mode. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I will talk about. The thing was that even človek v ohrození, people in a need, started to collect accommodation, but they were so super busy at the border that we then agreed that we will take care of that part of the activities, and they can focus on the work in the field directly. Next, well, good questionnaire, exact and detailed. Next one, please. These were the things that we included in the questionnaire. We were asking who is coming, including names, children, age, group size, which was important for the transport. As you know, that people were afraid to split. You know, if there were bigger families, we were trying to look at least for 2 cars at the same time. No, not yet. Sorry. Special needs, we were already asking in the first questionnaire. So whatever is, let's say, if somebody needed some special treatment or some special psychological help, some health issues. So we basically had it covered already in the first questionnaire. And we were able to support it. First of all, we were using this information to accommodate people so that if we knew that there was a hospital and there was a pregnant woman coming, so we were accommodating them close to it. Or if somebody needed, I don't know, accommodation with pets, that was a big topic. So we were having this already in the questionnaire, you know, that who is coming, and even the amount of the animals can be sometimes deciding. Location preference was also asked because many people, as you know, were heading to the destinations where their family lives or some of their friends live. So we were trying to use this. And then we were trying to get the contact. Great advantage at this point was that we already had some of the mobile phone operators at the border of Slovakia giving away free SIM cards. So basically many people were having already Slovak phone number when they were addressing us via the formular from the border, which means that they had a free internet available, and they had a Slovak phone number in case that somebody wanted to contact them. So we usually had two phone numbers, the Ukrainian one and the Slovak one also attached. Viber was very useful because it has the opportunity, but I'm sure you know, Viber has a direct translator into Ukrainian. So basically you can write in your language and you just decide that you will translate it, and you can communicate even if you don't speak the language. Next one. That's just illustration. You can go forward. So important about accommodation. We were stealing like an artist, like using the concept that Airbnb and Booking.com are like collecting that kind of information. But we were separating, you know, we were collecting the data. We opened up a Google formula where people could address us and write down the you know, whether it was official accommodation or private, and they could say whether they will be paid or free and for how long. So that was the most important. But we also have been asking number of rooms, number of beds, when can we call? So are the night calls available? When can we come with people? Let's say if somebody was leaving, they should let us know. Then, and this is unfortunate situation in Slovakia because we are quite racist country, that we have been asking, we have added after several bad incidents, we have added the question whether we can accommodate third countries people, because as you know, many students studying in Ukraine were fleeing, and so sometimes it happened that we were accommodating for a few days, let's say students from, I don't know, Morocco, and people were sometimes then, you know, saying that we wanted to accommodate people from Ukraine. So we actually add this question as to prevent such situation to happen. And it was even the call center asking and double checking whether they understood the question correctly. Then talking about the protection groups, I would say this is for example, when we talk about people from the LGBTQ community, that we were especially, you know, like having information where the safe places for these people. Then we talk when we have asked about the access without barriers for the people with handicap, which was super helpful. Then also when we were handing over the information to UNICEF or UNHCR, because they could easily, you know who needs this kind of help. And again, pets, cats, dogs, how many can be accommodated. Important thing was that we have like right after we started to do this kind of accommodation, we send out survey on the very, let's say, first 100 accommodated guests have received, the people the guests, but also the people who were accommodating received the survey, which helped us a lot to improve the process, you know, exactly to have the questions covered which were not there and similar. I add here Rabbit as an opportunity. Rabbit was a application on the phone, which was like to be downloaded from on iPhone or even Android. That was basically offered from a real estate provider who normally is working as like doing these things like going to people's housing, taking the photo shoot and selling their house, or you know, renting that house. So they offered us that they could make some kind of protection check for us, going to the houses, taking the pictures and like making an advertising, which will be for free, you know. And this is basically, that was a win-win situation where they wanted to know or make their application known, and it would help us, you know, to have that kind of check, pre-check. But in the end, we found out that there were, I would say, not many accommodators were actually wanting to do that. And we had such a quick flow that it was not very successful, and we decided to skip it. But it's existing, and that could be a way for the future if we decide, or if anybody decide. Next one. As I said, one of the learnings, make survey and implement the learnings that you do immediately. That was very fast process of implementing everything fast. Next one. We were having, you know, based on the surveys, but also on the feedback from you know, from the people and from the accommodators, we were also doing communication on social media. One of the things, for example, we have prepared a brochure for the accommodators, like what should be ready for everyone, how should they, you know, if people are arriving, how should they take care of them, like what is nice to have, what is essential, starting with, I don't know, towels, access to hot water, what they should explain, but also that they should not do it all at once, that usually people, when they were arriving, they were just hungry and wanting to sleep, and maybe they should not be pushy, and all these kind of advices were complemented into a brochure for accommodators, which we were constantly updating with the new information. So basically, if you were accommodating someone, you got the link, and whenever you came to the link, you had all the actual information, very structured, and that was available for Slovaks who were providing accommodation. And we use this information also for the social media. So let's say one of the things, dictionary, basic dictionary, or this was the link for health for Ukraine, or how to talk with people who experience trauma. So all this kind of information that we collected, we then also made available for those people who are not accommodating through our platform, but who also needed that kind of support, so that it's not, we were basically trying to be the hub where everybody would find any kind of information. Next one. We were also taking care of the transport. First days from the borders, then when the state organized the transport to, let's say, Košice or Michalovce, like the big cities where people could take the train, then we were taking over from there. But when we were organizing the transport, that was basically this data we were collecting, important children seats, whether they have it available or not. Then we could be matching people, you know, children of certain age, you know, going to the car with the proper seat. So all this kind of information was super important. And also availability, and to make the process very fast, then we created a group, for example, Bratislava, Vyšné Nemecké, which is the cross-border. So those who were ready to go that way, we already knew that they will be in one Facebook group. And when we had some urgent requests, we just placed it there, and people were quickly reacting. Later, it was solved by municipality with car and buses. Sorry. Okay. So hotspots on borders, train stations, and visa hotspots. So basically places where they needed our help. Next one. This was the map that we included, for all the helping organization, like so that people could actually decide where they want to go, because many of the people who were fleeing didn't ever leave Ukraine, so they had no clue where they're heading. And when you would ask them, they just wanted to stay as close to the border as possible. So just to give them an image, that was very, very helpful. Next one. This was just a hotspot on the station, and important for you maybe that we were doing the courses of crisis intervention, because many people psychologically collapsed, not only from those refugees, but also from the helping. So we were doing it as a support for our team. Next one. And important for you, maybe communication for the safety reasons. So whenever we contacted the person who were asking for help, and gave them access to, or the call center made the connection between person in need, accommodator, and driver, everybody would receive address, contact number, and all this. And just following, automatically they received email with instruction, accommodator, who should they do, people in need, like what should they be provided by the accommodator, so that they would have a contact. Next one. We also created an email with a brochure in Ukrainian, and then we printed it. And what was important is that to stay in touch with them. So we basically made repeated contact, survey whether there is a change of their needs, providing them with the new information, let's say, what are the new places with material help, new opening hours at the Zoll, new psychological, so all these kind of things. Later, the buddy program, so basically like families helping families directly. So making this kind of, so this all helps to the safety. Next one. I will just keep this, like this is all, this was one of the, next one.
Sorry, Lucia, just to say that if you could finish in one or two minutes, that would be great.
Okay, next. So I will just go straight to the system of work. We had a call center 24 hours, 7 days a week, where at least 2 people speaking Ukrainian and Russian were available, and like guidelines and videos for fast onboarding, because people were rotating very fast. Let's say volunteer lasted for a week and then he couldn't anymore. So all this kind of, this is practical. What was important to know, when are the train arrivals? Because whenever the train arrival was, there was a big, traffic jam at the station. So that was again practical to have support on the timings, let's say when the train were arriving, and then to access to the database directly for all these helping organization. So the GDPR compliance should be in place already when you are creating the questionnaire, that you can provide these data to the helping organization in the spot, or where the people are accommodated, and also for the accommodators. Next one. And I think, well, this is important. Update information, like if you want to do it fast, you need to call very often to check whether the accommodation is still free. And this was the, I would say, game changer. We had a chatbot who was daily calling to the places which needed the most accommodation, so that the call center didn't have to call 5 times to find a free spot. But basically Xenia made available, we had, and I can show you then the system, how it was working, that it was really daily updated, that we have it available for people arriving tonight, and whether we can call them tonight. And I think I will probably leave it out then. If somebody will be interested in more, I have add it to the presentation, everything, and I will be gladly doing follow-up if you need with questions.
Thank you so much, Lucia. It is all very interesting, and thank you for going so into detail on your practicalities. It's amazing to see how you can use applications today to improve your work and also to focus so much on safety, which is an issue that we are all very concerned with when it comes to accommodation. I think in the interest of time, I see that we now have Angelique Petritz with us from DG Home. Angelique, if you could turn on your microphone, please, and Clotilde is already sharing the presentation. I will pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Simona. Can you hear me?
Yes, there's a bit of an echo, I think. Can you try?
Maybe.
Can you try again now?
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes, now it's perfect.
Okay.
Very clear.
It's a combination of computer and phone. Very strange thing. Anyway, so thank you very much. Thank you for giving us the floor today. It was very interesting to listen to Lucia, because it's exactly all these initiatives is exactly what we're trying to do, and we try to do in the Safe Homes initiative, to bring together best practices across Europe so that people can learn from each other how we can help Ukrainians who flee the war. So this is the next slide, please. So why we have this Safe Homes initiative? Because it's you know, when all these things started happening in February, of course it was unprecedented because we had dealt with migrants, but in different forms. It's different when you have Syrians coming from Turkey, or you have Africans coming to Italy. It's a very different setting. And when you have all these huge numbers of Ukrainians fleeing the war and coming to Europe, I mean, the numbers were very different. So the numbers were very different. So we had to use a different approach. And for one of these examples is this Temporary Protection Directive. And there I make a small parenthesis because sometimes we're criticized, but why do you do the Temporary Protection Directive for Ukrainians? And what about all the others, you know, the Syrians, the Africans? Why are they treated differently? No, they're not treated differently. It is because we had to deal with these unprecedented numbers, millions within days. And the asylum system would have completely collapsed if we waited for these people to apply for asylum. So this is one of the initiatives we set for the first time. Actually, we activate this Temporary Protection Directive. So the Safe Homes is part of the communication of the Commission about how to go about to support people fleeing from Ukraine. And it's part also, it was announced at the 10-point plan. We had the 10-point plan with different initiatives in different fields, like transport, like the Solidarity Platform, where member states get together, for instance, like the registration. So it was one of these initiatives. And for the first time, we saw these private initiatives, these people opening up their homes, becoming hosts to host people from Ukraine fleeing the war. And that was unprecedented. So we felt that we needed to provide support to these hosts and also to the hosted people. And I added this sentence from our president a few days ago at the State of the Union, who mentioned that how important the solidarity in Ukraine is, and how it is still, you know, it is our blueprint. So next slide, please. As you know, integration is a national competence. So also hosting and coordinating housing is a national competence. So what we could do as European Commission, as DG Home, is create some guidelines in order to support hosts and support hosted people. But we cannot go further than that. We can support, we can help, exchange best practices, for instance. What Lucia mentioned, these fantastic best practices. So it's very important to disseminate that so that other people can learn from that. We can learn from each other, but we cannot, let's say, have legislation on that. We cannot impose measures on our side. So this is something clear. So these measures to support hosts, because everything was a bit wild in the first place. Of course, it was a great solidarity, but people coming forward, yes, I open my house. But there are some things we need. I mean, we felt that we had to create these guidelines. For instance, to fix the duration. We don't know how long the war will last. So you have people hosting, and maybe, you know, after some months, will you feel some fatigue? I mean, how long I'm going to host these people there? Okay, there is enthusiasm at the beginning, but you don't know how long this will last. So for instance, one of the guidelines is to fix a duration in the first place, to have a minimum durations and the conditions of the stay. We also need to organize suitable accommodation in private homes by central points of coordination. I mean, Lucia gave a very good example of that. This has to be coordinated. Can be through a platform, can be NGOs can do that. I mean, depends, member states have different approaches. Local and regional authorities play a very important role there. Even foundations play a very important role there. So we have very good examples of setting up online platforms. I mean, we saw that in Slovakia, we know in Romania this happened as well. So they're very, very good examples like that. The matching between hosts and hosted people. I mean, hosts can have, hosted people can have different needs. For example, depends how many they are, the numbers, if it's a family, if kids have to go to school, so school has to be nearby, it cannot be an isolated area. They need to have their own room. And also for the hosts is what they accept the hosted people to do. I mean, what are the limits? What places, what parts of the house they can use, what time, I don't know, can they take a shower or can make noise, or all these things need to be decided in advance, to be set in clear, because it helps communication, it avoids misunderstandings and frictions, because of course you know that you host somebody you don't know, so in the same house. So it's not difficult, you know, to imagine that there can be, you know, conflicts and frictions, even if there's goodwill from both sides. So this matching is very important. Again, very much helped by local authorities and NGOs. And these specific needs also, it's not only the children going to school, but there are people, also vulnerable people like pregnant women who need specific support, people with mental disorders, people who had left their wheelchair behind because they couldn't take it with them on the bus when they fled, so they need special support. So all these things have to be, you know, put in clear and specific matches be found. And of course, we have to make sure that the private house is suitable. What suitable means, it means, of course, also that it's clean, that hygiene is there, that as I mentioned before, that the space is sufficient for the needs. And also that it covers these vulnerable people. Any type of vulnerability, but of course also that the house is safe. And we need to monitor and supervise the houses. And there are also good initiatives from member states, for instance, about vetting, how you vet and monitor, again, can be by member states, be done by member states, by NGOs, by local communities. Some member states ask for a criminal record, for instance, and we need, of course, to avoid that there is any human trafficking, that there is any sexual or labor exploitation, because, you know, everything is out there. Everything is out there and the dangers are there. So we have to make sure that the houses are really, and the hosts are vetted, and provide national emergency helplines for both hosts and hosted people. So if there is any problem, if people feel in danger, especially hosted people, they can immediately, you know, in their language, at the end of the phone, you know, mention any problems or any, and so that the authorities can interfere. And of course, continue supervising, because things can be good, you know, now, and maybe in 3 months they're not good anymore, or there are other things which, you know, have interfered. And another issue there is that we need really to support hosted people, because they may be scared. They may be scared to denounce, because they don't know where, you know, they have a house now, they don't know where they will be found in the future. So it's really important to explain to them that there is a structure to support them in any problem, and they shouldn't hesitate in, you know, taking the phone and you know, expressing their concerns. So next, please. So how all this can happen? Partnerships are extremely important, because as integration, I mean, we have that in the action plan of integration and inclusion, we need all stakeholders on board. Integration cannot happen by one group. Of course, it is a two-way direction. People have to want to integrate, but also the society should welcome them. But we need, in terms of society, we need all partners. We need member states. Often funds, for instance, are managed by member states. We need local and regional authorities, because they are on the front line with the people fleeing the war. We need NGOs, and we need also foundations. So I think that cities and regions have a very important role to play also in coordinating the different activities, because they are the ones who are in touch with the NGOs. They are the ones who are in touch, the first ones to welcome the people arriving, and they are in touch with the member states to express the needs with the central authorities, which usually are not there on the ground. So that's extremely important, and to let's say help coordination. Twinning is another interesting initiative, twinning of cities. So for instance, different cities can learn from each other what are the different initiatives to welcome refugees from Ukraine. So that's also, again, coordinated by the local and regional authorities. And the member states, we speak to the member states. We have the Solidarity Platform, where member states will coordinate, but we have also, through the European Integration Network, the mutual assistance programs. And in the mutual assistance programs, member states will learn from each other how to go about in different issues. And in the next round of the mutual assistance programs, we're going to call, quite shortly, we'll encourage member states to look into the safe housing initiative, how as a priority. So how to best, support hosts and hosted people fleeing Ukraine. And yes, I'd like to mention also the diaspora. The diaspora plays a very important role, because they can be sort of interface between the people arriving and the local regional authorities and the NGOs, and also in terms of language. We heard that from Lucia, for instance, you have these people, 24 hours, these lines where people can speak in their language. That's very important. It's not only a matter of getting by, it's also feeling more, welcomed and feeling more confident when you can express yourself in the language. So the diaspora is extremely important. So next slide, please. That's another initiative where we looked into in the same homes, is the new European Bauhaus. The new European Bauhaus comes from our friends and colleagues from culture. But it's a very interesting initiative, because it's about sustainable housing, but it can be used also in emergency situations, just as housing people fleeing Ukraine. And the European Bauhaus brings together architects, designers, and urban planners who work together to respond on accommodation needs. And the housing has to be functional, sustainable, and cost effective. So it's not just building a house, it's building a house in a context and in a social network, which is very important, so that people can feel integrated. So there are many interested initiatives in the European Bauhaus for emergency accommodation, of turning, for instance, abandoned factories or abandoned supermarkets or shopping centers into housing with the help of architects and designers, where people can have some privacy. For instance, there are some provisional walls, let's say. They create bathrooms, they create rooms, but all provisional, and they are aesthetic, and they create some privacy, and they can really work for emergency. So this is another initiative, and we relate to where we are in touch with our colleagues from culture, because this, as I said, this comes from there. Next. So community sponsorships. That's another important issue. I mean, we did work on community sponsorship in the past, but I think in this context, we see the huge importance of community sponsorship, because we cannot, this huge, I don't like the word flux, but numbers of people arriving from Ukraine that we want to support. It's very difficult to do it only with public funds, because you have to find the funds and be able to coordinate in a very short time. So the partnerships between the state, between civil society and the private individuals, the sponsors, can be extremely, extremely important and helpful, and help find solutions. So this is, of course, complementary to the usual integration measures. It will not replace the state, it will not replace, of course, the local regional authorities, but can be really complementary. And sometimes private initiatives are more flexible, that they have this advantage. So they can be adapted to different circumstances and different traditions, and can take different forms. And this, in the end of the day, will facilitate integration and help people become more independent. So it is this patchwork of initiatives, of people, of stakeholders. We need to be all together and be all on board. And this is what we're trying to do in the Safe Homes Initiative, bring everybody together. So next one, please. Of course, there is this big question about funding. We try to help there. We try to be creative also for funding. There are different funds, as you know, the European funds. It's the European Social Fund. So under the European Social Fund, you can fund assistance programs for housing, social services to support housing. And of course, also we can do rent subsidies under the European Social Fund. The European Regional Development Fund, there we can more directly support refurbishing, building, purchasing of non-segregated individual social housing in the mainstream community, which of course can also benefit from which can benefit the people fleeing from Ukraine. So we try to coordinate these funds, I mean, to make known to people, to member states, how they can use these funds. Under our own funds, the Asylum, Migration, Integration Fund, we have now made available 400 million euros through the emergency assistance to the most affected member states. And we managed to divert, in order to have this 400 million available, the thematic facility. I mean, the calls we had every year for the projects, the multi-stakeholder projects, the multinational projects. We didn't have the call this year, so we unfortunately, I mean, I know there are complaints for that, but of course we had to take this emergency decision and to direct this money, to divert this money to the member states which are the borderline and needed more support, emergency support. And the care regulation is also interesting because it's a new regulation which is relatively new, which allows greater flexibility. So under the care, you can combine, for instance, ESF and ERDF using funds from one or the other, because before it was, you couldn't use, combine the two. And also you can use them retroactively, which is another important issue. So next, please. So I'm finishing. So what is the outlook now? So cooperation, I mentioned, I think several times, between national, local communities, sponsors is very important. Learning from each other is very important. Public and private funding can maximize results of good practices and initiatives. Again, private sponsorship community sponsorship can complement the state sponsorships, the state funding. Solutions need to be flexible, sustainable, and reinforce successful existing initiatives. We need a whole society approach. We need to learn from each other. And this is why this kind of exchange, as you are organizing today, Simona, is so important, because this is the way to learn from each other. This is how we hear what the others are doing. And we have to, keep this pace and keep learning from each other. It's also on our side sometimes where it's difficult. We have 27 member states. There are initiatives here and there. We're trying to bring everything together, but we don't know everything. And this is why it's so important to bring people together and, around the same table so you can talk to each other. That's the only way forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelique. That was a very useful and interesting overview for us to know about the different mechanisms and possibilities of funding. And I'm sure we will have questions for you. I see there are already a couple in the Q&A section if you want to look at them, or otherwise we'll try to pick up on them after the last intervention. But I think we should move now to our colleagues from Ireland, Elizabeth Pena and Arat Trianes Salguero. I think they are speaking particularly to this partnership that they worked with in their pledged accommodation program in Dublin. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, guys, and thanks for inviting us along today. I'm just going to get my. Can you see that? No, can you see that?
Yes, it's coming now.
Okay, perfect. Hoping so. Okay, thanks everyone. I suppose it's interesting to hear similar experiences from the different areas, but just very quickly to go through Peter McVerry Trust, anyway, to where we come into this space. We were working with the Department of Children in Ireland, which is a department that would look after, has responsibility for refugees and people in the international protection system. And we were working in that space through COVID, primarily in terms of providing COVID services, testing and isolation and quarantine services for people who are coming into the state and for people who are in direct provision in the state. We also had services work with people in direct provision who have status in terms of their refugee status and supporting them into accommodation. So we were slightly in this sphere, we obviously, and then in February we had the Ukrainian crisis, the war started there. But so that's just give you a little background context in terms of that. We've supported 1,200 people to move out of direct provision, and we have supported over 10,000 people in terms of our COVID interventions and psychosocial supports offered. Just then in terms of the Ukrainian crisis, so Peter McVerry Trust, we were working with across a number of hotels in the Dublin region, primarily providing in-reach supports to people who'd arrived to the state seeking international protection. However, in February then we have the Ukrainian nationals started to arrive, and you can see there in terms of the hotels we're providing supports in. We have days there in February and early March where we've 130 arrivals. So as indicated there, the asylum system was already quite pressurized, and this was just going to bring it all to a standstill and to a stall, really. So the beneficiaries of temporary protection piece came into place, and then government and Department of Children seeking alternative accommodation. And what we noticed very earlier on was having two emergency, I suppose, arrival hotels or accommodation sites, having two categories where you have people claiming asylum, people who have asylum provided on entry, was creating quite a disjuncture in terms of services on the ground, and some difficulties there as well in terms of different eligibilities being provided. Just to give you a bit more context in terms of Ireland, has been, as of the 18th of August, there was 47,000 Ukrainians arriving to Ireland, and an average 100 arrivals a day ongoing. 1/10 of those arrivals now live within the pledged accommodation system, and that's about 3,500. I'll talk further on the pledged accommodation piece in a short while. But I suppose the initial responses around accommodation from the Department of Children was around private sector, contracting hotels, guest houses, anything that was available, and very rapidly as well. Procuring through statutory mechanisms such as the Housing Agency in Ireland, and then emergency provision through, as time went on, those avenues were becoming more and more restricted, I suppose, or more used. And it was the local authorities across Ireland were asked to step in and provide emergency responses. So we had the opening of rest centres in like gyms, community halls, and now more lately in our Gormanstown, in our military camp up outside of North Dublin. And then moved quickly to establish implementation partners around the pledged accommodation process. So that initiated on the 15th of March, so within a month, within 3 weeks of the crisis. And that was through the Department of Children and the Irish Red Cross, and citizens were asked to pledge their property as either standalone or shared property. And then steps put in place to vet properties, whether it's shared, for vetting, guard vetting on the property owners. And then local authorities were tasked with vetting the actual premises as well in terms of fire safety regulation, suitability, etc. And then the accommodation recognition payment has since come in as well for those hosting or those who are providing properties to people from beneficiaries of temporary protection from the Ukraine. So they're the main kind of structures in place. Also, in conjunction with that, you have an all-government, all-Ireland response in a way through a community response forum. So each local area will have a community response forum, and there's a compromise of state agencies and the third sector in terms of NGOs, volunteers, community groups. And that's looking to provide for things like, as we say, as mentioned there, transport, education, work, the local dysphoria, I suppose, of people in terms of who are already in Ireland, schools for children, sports, activities, recreation, all of those pieces, information, advice, Ukrainian translations, etc., etc. So this is well established now and ongoing, and looks to really identify gaps and enhance service provision to the Ukrainian groups across Ireland. In terms of Peter McVerry Trust, we go back to where we were there in February and people were arriving. Our initial, now we weren't the only NGO providing supports to hotels, it's just we had quite a large portion of them on the initial few weeks. And initially it's around, and this is slightly before the beneficiaries of temporary protection piece came into play or into action. And so a lot of the early arrivals to Ireland wouldn't have had, they'd come in before the social welfare, social protection systems and status from the Department of Justice systems was set up. So really it was around providing immediate need, looking at health, financial assistance, clothing, and also at that time we were still very much in a COVID mindset at the Peter McVerry Trust, coming out of the back of COVID. So we were giving antigen tests to people arriving, trying to, to keep safe, reduce risk there in terms of transmission. And we did pick up a few positive COVID cases coming through as well. So we were able to respond quickly, provide isolation through our own services as well for those. And then again, integration into community and local services. So community response was very strong from the get-go. So where we had Ukrainians arrived to some of our hotels, you had a lot of community kind of knocking on the door, providing donations, looking to give, all the supports and engage in any way they could to support the groups. And from that, then in our initial emergency space as an organisation, as a country, maybe we were probably mirroring the country in that sense, just it's emergency and it's just quick responding and meeting need as it presents, and then trying to plan forward. so from that, then we at that, in around that time, I say 15th of March, they set up the pledged accommodation, and thousands of people across Ireland would have gone online and pledged their accommodation. Now, as time has unfolded, that has, I suppose, that there's been its own story as well, in that, like, people have retracted their pledged accommodations, some haven't been suitable, etc., etc. So the number of actual accommodations through the citizens, I suppose, has reduced over time. However, the Department of Children, with implementation partners, including Peter McVerry Trust, the Red Cross and the IOM, and the local authorities, are working ongoing to support and match people into pledged accommodations. So in terms of how the process works with ourselves, we would assess households, identify their needs, again, back to the pets, mobility, rural, urban, access to transport being a big one, access to what people's the Ukrainian beneficiaries' expectation is, and their identified need, and then matching to what the pledged property owners' expectation is, and what they're expecting, and what they want to offer, what they're available to offer. So there is a lot in the process on both sides, and I'll probably talk a bit further on that shortly. However, we established a pledged accommodation team. We employed a Ukrainian national as an interpreter. We translated all our documents, and as benefit to us, we had access to translation services, and we had a well-established practice through where we're working in international protection of being able to use online platforms or software to translate multiple languages for communication, etc. So we were on a strong enough footing in that respect. Sorry, bear with me. Yeah, so in terms of the pledge process, we would be tasked by the Department of Children to go to certain areas or by a local authority. So we're working with about 7 local authorities across Ireland, where we've been engaged as implementation partners. So where there's hotels, guest houses, rest centres, our team would go out and meet with those accommodated there, assess their need, and again, back to that mobility, pets, location, working skills, schools for children, etc. And then identifying back with the property owner on their property. So the local authority may have vetted the property, however, the bed configuration may need to be changed, or there may be some additional furniture items needed. The property owner might have a very specific idea in mind, and there might be a lot of discussion with that property owner on terms of, what their expectation is, and then also there might be expectations from the Ukrainian beneficiaries themselves in terms of what they want to require. So there's a lot of, I suppose, discussion, negotiation, and conversation around the matching, and that's important because we're in a crisis and there's a very short supply of accommodation across the nation of Ireland. However, we want the match to work and not break down. And in that, we will have cases where matches have broken down, and they would revert. If we've matched them, they tend to revert as the last point of contact, really, back to ourselves, and we'd engage with the Department of Children around alternatives, or we would identify that maybe that pledged property isn't a suitable one going forward and have needed to be reassessed. So we would also support the family or the household to move. We provide the transport. We make sure the Ukrainian license agreement and the English version is signed as well, and there are 6 months license agreements, and keep record of those. And then property owners themselves can then apply for their, there is a special grant or funding stream available in terms of hosting Ukrainians. So we will provide this service 7 days a week as well. Again, back to availability, a lot of people are working. They might only be available the evening or Sunday, or and then just another facet that comes up is someone might have pledged a property, but they're away for summer, so it's not available till October, or there's delays in terms of the property becoming available. So we're kind of constantly factoring that in as well in terms of going back and when to go back to property owners to create a move. So it's just a small map to try and identify the pledge, the process it. So we get the pledged property, we identify the households, we do the assessments across both. We keep very, someone mentioned there about data, we keep very, our data accuracy and immediacy of data in terms of our properties and our assessed households is very important, so we can act rapidly as well and identify rapidly and move to create moves and transfers. Again, and then it's reporting back to the Department of Children and then to where the local authorities have engaged us, where we report back onto them as well in terms of outcomes, properties used, delays, any further queries that we won't be able to resolve locally that may need further intervention for whatever reason. So, for example, we might have someone with medical vulnerability and the property is not near to the hospital where they're now signed up for treatment. Maybe someone with disabilities and they're in a special needs, a specific school, and the property is too far away for someone to get to in terms of accessing school. So all these pieces. And then a feature that has come up for us quite significantly is the rural urban piece. So we have had a lot of properties pledged that are quite rural, but the majority of arrivals into Ireland would not have transport, and our public transport system doesn't really facilitate to the level that maybe is available in some other European or even in the Ukraine itself. So that's a factor. So that has kind of pushed some of those pledged properties off the table. So that's our pledge, and Ara can ask and can speak more to it if you have any questions, because she's probably operationalising it on our side. She looks after the team and ensuring that we're covering all the bases there. But in other responses, we have had a number of other services where we're providing direct accommodation support. So we have 2 services where we're accommodating 10 households in each service at any one time, and then working with them towards community integration and then move to local pledged accommodation within the community. We also have a service for unaccompanied minors, which in the Dublin region, which has taken in 5 Ukrainian unaccompanied minors to date, and some of those with very significant and profound and complex need, where we'd work with TUSLA, which is the Irish Child Services Department, in terms of ongoing placement and specialised supports. Just to summarise, we've engaged and supported over 4,000 Ukrainians who have beneficiary protection to date. We've supported 671 into further accommodation. 433 of those are through the pledged accommodation process, and as I said, we've had 5 unaccompanied minors with very specific and specialised supports needs on play. Sorry, I do tend to speak very fast, so I hope you all understood or got that. Any questions, I'd be delighted to answer.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, I think that was pretty clear and very interesting to see how you worked in the Irish context, where, as you mentioned, there is a short supply of housing, and you also have worked a lot with direct provision, as you also say, but I am very cautious and aware of the time. I know we have a bit of delay and don't want to take from the second panel. However, I would like to take 4 more minutes to ask each of you one question, and I will try to combine 2 questions that were sent in the chat. Firstly, to Angelique. I think there were a few questions around the issue, well, connected to private accommodation and the focus that the guidance has on this. There was a question about if you know of other examples that you can mention which are not partially or completely dependent on private initiative as hosts. And in relation to that, we also had a question about the long-term housing solutions. Is there any plan from the Commission? How do you plan to develop the Safe Homes initiative in this sense? And do you plan to look more at the long-term aspect as well? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So it's about the long-term, your first question.
If there are other examples beyond the private housing that you can mention.
Well, the other examples, and long-term, sorry, are the structures in place. So shall I use this? I think it's better. Shall I use the phone?
No, we can hear you well.
Okay. So the best, I mean, the other examples are the ones which member states put already in place when we had this, migration coming from Asia and from Africa. I mean, like camps, for instance, and they're still in place. I mean, it's not the best example, when people arrive to be put in camps, but there was a solution this before, let's say, this private initiative started, because we never had these private initiatives before. I mean, when we had, migrants arriving even in large numbers from Africa and Asia to the European Union, but there was never a private initiative. So we had, of course, camps, and there's a lot of funding from us. I mean, how to put in place the camps, and also vetting of the camps, and also that you follow standards. For instance, the Asylum Agency has provided standards for that. I mean, and also has worked for the private accommodation with standards about housing. I mean, there are, these are the member states' initiatives that existed anyway before Ukrainians started, before the war started, but they were not enough to cover all these huge numbers. This is why these private initiatives came, and we were also, caught by surprise. I mean, I saw another question in the chat: why it took 5 months to have the Safe Homes initiative? To me, it's a miracle. It took only 5 months, because it's we are international organizations. We have 27 member states. Integration and housing is a national competence. So we have to react. So we had to first see what's happening, and different things happened. Then we had to put in place this, the 10-point plan, how to face, what to do. And the Safe Home Initiatives was one of these 10 points. Then you had to discuss with member states. You have to see what's happening. How do we know what's happening here and there? We need to consult. So we consulted the urban agenda, for instance, which are member states, there are regions and cities. We organized sessions with cities and regions in the front line. We organized a consultation in the Solidarity platform with regions and cities. And all this brought all this information. And then we had to draft this, and it had to be endorsed by the Solidarity platform, which means by the member states, and then become a communication to the Commission. So I think 5 months is not long at all, but just to address this. The long-term accommodation, it's the same. I mean, of course, ideally this should lead to long-term accommodation, but again, we don't know how long the war will last. And at the beginning, we thought it was for a short period. It seems it's less short now. But what, of course, we do will support member states in whatever, the best solution is. Will help with guidelines for sure. But I cannot tell you now what the future will be, because we react to the needs and we support. But we cannot, as I said, it's the member states which are responsible for housing. So if the member states come with a request of support, we are there. And we look into it, and we look into the future of the safe homes, and discuss with member states and come up with other initiatives, other guidelines. So it's all open, and it's all open, and we react to the needs as we reacted to the needs, now and since the war started.
Thank you, Angelique. I think the second session will be also important for you to take in the solutions and the discussions that our colleagues will develop on. one last question for our other two speakers, Lucia and Elizabeth and Ara, if you would like to intervene. You've worked on the ground implementing this type of programs that the guidance is recommending. Could you, in 2 minutes maximum, come with a conclusion or a recommendation for the EU? Where do you see the need now, and what support would these kind of programs need going further?
I will take the first word and I will have 2 sentences. First of all, long-term housing. As you know, many people in Ukraine are now staying in the houses in the western part of Ukraine, which have no heating. So we should be ready for the move to happen these days or close months. And we should be better prepared. Communication that the accommodators, the private accommodators, will get money from states and European Commission long enough so that they don't make any, like we already have now people telling us that they will have to leave the accommodation because the state didn't announce that there should be prolonged period of payouts. So this is essential. Communicate fast. Don't wait till the last moment. Make it fast and clear that it will continue. And I think that's the most important.
Thank you. Elizabeth, Ara?
I'm waiting to see if Ara speaks.
I'll go ahead. I agree. I think provision of long-term options it's the next step. But I also feel, at least in the Irish context, that some additional support to owners of the properties could really help to encourage those current agreements to remain in place, and also to encourage additional people to accept or to agree to take more people into their houses, or even to offer their accommodation for a number of months. That's where I would say the need will be in the next while.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your interventions, and I invite you to stay with us for the second panel, and I pass the floor to Freck, who will chair the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Simona. We run a little bit over time, so I think I'll run a little bit over time as well, just out of respect to the speakers. So I think the audience can bear with us, and so we'll probably go until 12:15 or something like that. So the second panel, like Simona said, is looking at the challenges that we experience with private hosting, but also the sort of longer-term housing solutions. I heard the Commission representative saying that we don't know how long the war will last. Long-term doesn't mean permanent, but it means something else than staying as a host with a host for a short time. So we'll look into that. And we have 4 speakers, and I will take them one by one. We'll start, and I'll present them also one by one. We'll start with Pierre Verberen, who is the president of Bruce Help, which is coordinating the support for homeless people in the Brussels region, and is also responsible for the support for Ukrainian refugees for the Brussels government. I hope I got that right, Pierre. For you, I would like to hear what are the challenges you experience on the ground, maybe a little bit of information on the referral system on to collect you have in Brussels, and it seems to work well. And a thorny question at the end to explain how you deal with the sort of differential treatment, if I can say it that way, between the Ukrainian refugees and other asylum seekers, because that is seems to be a particular problem in Brussels. So the floor is yours, Pierre.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Hello, each of you, colleagues. So thank you for the invitation. My first answer to your question, Freek, is that in Brussels we already had a kind of habitus in working with private initiative. During the Syrian war, we have had a lot of people hosting Syrian, and after that in 2017, hosting Eritrean, Sudanese, Ethiopian people in their house. So there is a kind of previous opportunity to test private initiative has a real answer to migration from tackling and addressing migration. So when the federal government in Brussels, in Belgium, decided to ask people for hosting Ukrainian in Brussels, it was not very new, and it was possible to let the regional government recognizing that this is a part of the institutional solution. And progressively, we try to get the involvement of the regional authorities in order to support this private initiative, more than to recognize that using the private initiative is a kind of recognition of the failure of the state. So that's not a failure of the state in using private initiative. That's part of an institutional answer to new problems. And actually, the government, the regional government, is trying to create institutional support for this private initiative. What is the institutional support at this stage is a formal convention, a kind of contract between Ostit and Oster. So that's not usual renting contract, but it's a fee paid by the Ostit to the Oster, which is exempted to the law of usual housing mechanism. So it's an exception, but it's an institutional exception with a contract, with a fee paid by the Ukrainian family to the Belgian or to the Brussels family, with also a code of conduct. So what does it mean to live together? What does it mean to share domesticity? And it's very important to address all those issues. What is clearness? What is noise? What is I don't know, heating? What is food? And that's very important to create the condition of the dialogue between the Oster and the Ostit on those very important issues, because when you share your day and your space with people, that's very important to put everything on the table. And we have the second point, which is very innovative for Brussels, is that we use the community approach, and we build this approach with the Ukrainian community. And actually, we have officials in all the departments of the Brussels region, which are refugees from Ukraine. So in the administration for prevention and security, we have a Ukrainian woman who is in charge of explaining to the community what is at stake in terms of security and prevention. In the department for employment, that's the same. In the department for education, that's the same. In the department for health, for social protection, we have an official coming from the community and habilitated to explain to the community what is the situation. And concerning the relation between the hoster and the hosted, this community is a kind of mediator. So we try to let the the day life of the Ukrainian at the level of the domesticity and not at the level of the institution. So the community work as an informal mediator between hoster and hosted when there are something going wrong and there. But we also have a survey habilitating us to declare that actually in Brussels, 85% of the hoster are very happy with this experience. And it's very important to get the information concerning what is the main understanding of what happens in the region. So when we know that 85% of the people are happy, when we face trouble, when there is one specific experience that works not very well, and when we have very big trouble between the hosted and the hoster, it's easier to refer to the main figure and to address a specific problem than when the media, for example, echo that all the situations are problematic because they only talk about a problematic situation and not about the main the real figures. So that's very important to have survey, and we did this kind of survey with academic with the academic, but also with the community. So we have two kind of survey. One is academic, but based on a scientific approach, and also one coming from the community, helping us to understand very sensitively, qualitatively, what is at stake in this community. So first, recognizing that the private initiative is part of the solution, of the institutional solution, without any culpabilization of the state for his failure. So it's completely assumed that the institutions support private initiative to using the community as a key resources to address all the issue of the Ukrainian and the Brussels context and the people in Brussels. And three, what is really important is to avoid as much as possible to use institutional hosting facilities, institutional shelter. So all the messages are oriented to find solution in the private market as a long-term and sustainable solution, more than developing a lot of institutional answer, institutional shelter to welcome people in need here in Brussels. Because we know that camps, we know that institution, we know that accommodation, shelters are the worth solution for Ukrainian and for all the other people. And to address your last question about the double standard for people coming from Syria, Ethiopia, or homeless people. So, as I already said, we are experienced in Brussels to host people coming from other countries. Last 3 years, the regional government bought two very big accommodation to host undocumented minors and to host undocumented people. So the regional government is already paying for creating accommodation for undocumented migrants. So that's not news. So we used this small initiative in the past to build an institutional approach which is more universalist and not based on double standards. So first, we use this story to create a kind of a narrative. And second, we develop this narrative as we try with Ukrainian, and if we succeed with Ukrainian, it will become the normal standard. And this narrative is very important because it's a commitment. It's an institutional commitment to learn lessons from Ukrainian and to mainstream those lessons for other groups. And for example, we have created a very impressive mechanism to identify unoccupied places, buildings, and to develop accommodation in those places. As I explained already, our message is, please, Ukrainian, don't refer to institutional accommodation, but try to access to the private market, the housing private market, so that the places we have created are unoccupied. And progressively, we are trying to use this tank of places, of institutional places, for other target groups, as homeless people, as asylum seekers, because if you are if you know the actual situation in Brussels, we already have, we also have a crisis on the official asylum mechanism. And we discuss with the other level, institutional level, to open the places to other target groups. And that's very important. And in the questions you asked me before by email, you asked me what is possible to do with the Safe Home initiative of the Commission. With all the respect, and I know that everything is difficult as official representative of a regional government working in all the official groups of official working on hosting Ukrainian and integrate Ukrainian in the daily life. I never heard about this initiative, the Commission initiative, and it was impossible. I did not know, I was not aware of this initiative, and nobody told me that it exists. So with all respect, that's very important to be transparent and to discuss honestly together. This information didn't find the target because I never heard about that before giving your kind invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Just for clarity, the system of private hosting that you have in Brussels and that works well and that has a history before the Ukrainian refugee crisis, like you say that it can be some kind of a longer-term solution. Can you give us an idea of how long hosts keep guests in their housing? And maybe also tell us how many people are currently benefiting from this private hosting system? I mean, Ukrainians and other refugees?
Yeah. So actually, we have approximately 8,000 people hosted by Brussels people. So it means that probably 4,000 hosters are giving hospitality to Ukrainians. So it's not a very small amount. And they are for 80% of them, they are hosting people since April. So it means something like 5 to 6 months. So it's not a small amount. And we have, as institution, to take into account that it exists and we have to recognize this huge effort by citizens to host Ukrainian. What we are doing with the community is to create a lot of meetings between hoster and hosted to use the social capital of hoster to find long-term accommodation in the private market for them. So that the regional accommodation are only used and Brussels, the institution I share, is responsible for this dispatching, but that's not only dispatching, it's a kind of mediation. So we work with the hoster, with the hosted, with the municipality and with the region to know what is the best solution for the people and how to maximize the orientation to the public housing market in order to avoid public accommodation. Yes, is it the answer you want?
Very clear. Thanks a lot, Pierre, and it was really fascinating.
Your microphone is mute.
Thank you. It's good that the panelist tells the chair to switch on the microphone. No, I was saying a fascinating, really helpful presentation. I think that people will come back to you to learn more about the Brussels system. It looks very impressive, at least. Let's move on to Ave Lauren from the OECD, migration expert there. Lauren, you in the OECD published recently a report on the issue. Would be quite interesting to know what are the conclusions from your report. What challenges do you see in relation to private hosting, and how do you see the sort of transition from private hosting to long-term housing solutions, or whether private hosting can actually be some kind of a longer-term housing solution for the people, like it is the case in Brussels? So the floor is yours, Ave.
Thank you so much, and it's been incredibly interesting to hear about the experiences from different places, because obviously my angle is slightly different, coming from sort of international organization where it's much more top down. Regarding the policy brief that you mentioned as well, as a sort of brief recap, so since February, since the Russians' war against Ukraine started, we have been publishing a number of different policy briefs on the different impacts of it. And the one on housing was published in July. And perhaps one of the kind of key takeaways when we go into it is actually when we consider the broad spectrum of policy responses, housing tends to be the one that OECD countries struggle the most with. So it is a challenge that people have had to react to. A lot of the responses have been reactive rather than sort of using pre-planned contingency plan approaches. And it's understandable as well, it's just the unprecedented flow of people to Europe and the kind of obligations that countries have taken on, and it's great that they have, to provide housing. They have created a demand that many countries have not dealt with. And I think especially many Central and Eastern European countries have had to sort of develop the infrastructure and coordination systems on the go. So this has definitely been a huge challenge. One of the things what we at the OECD want to say that despite the challenges, despite the risks, what has to be recognized is both that the governments and civil society, they have really rised up to meet the challenge. I will get back to it as well in terms of what Lucia was saying, that we now need to do a bit more pre-planning. I'll get back to that, but up to this point, I think there is much to be proud of as well, considering all the kind of circumstances. So the second key takeaway I would highlight, and one that is highly relevant for this event, is that majority of OECD countries have relied on the private hosts and households to actually meet the challenge. So it's not a side thing, it's not something that supports it, it has been the key pillar. And this, despite, I mean, obviously in different countries, the mix of accommodation options has been varied, and it has changed over time, it has changed over different regions. So for instance, in Germany, some areas, perhaps 10% have relied on private housing or kind of private hosts and households volunteering. In other regions, it's 80%. So the picture is mixed, but overall, the key pillar really has been the private system. And as has been said before, the private host, it's not a new phenomenon, but on that scale, it really is new. So this gets us to the third point, which we could see across the OECD countries, is that it was only as the flows began to stabilize that countries turned their attention to kind of assessing the systems, because everything was created on an ad hoc basis. So this kind of mitigation of risks and improvements that started a few months in. It's not to say that safeguards were not in place, they were. And we talk about, different challenges. One of the key ones is issues related to safety and risk of exploitation. Majority of countries really started thinking about it from the beginning. Whether there were institutional things in place, that's another question. But sort of these institutional safeguards have been created later. And I think Safe Homes Initiative here, obviously the question is, could it have been started beforehand? Sure, but it's sort of in the same way as in different countries. It sort of has really tried to create the framework, how to deal with this. So I think from that perspective, if we talk about blueprints for future, it's very important. So, but alongside this kind of coordination mechanism and frameworks that are being developed, another thing that we see is in the context of these kind of assessments that are happening, that in many countries, national and regional authorities are seeking to reclaim the coordinating role and away from private and civil society organizations. So I think in the first months, what we saw in the reception is that the private institutions were more agile, they reacted more quickly, but I think the movement now is a bit back to the central coordination. A fourth message that kind of the brief highlights, and something I think is important to consider, especially when we kind of start talking about the transition to long-term housing, is that it is not quite yet happening. In theory, it should be, but it's still one of these sort of looming challenges. And there is numerous efforts to support this. There are numerous measures to support this, but it is a huge, huge challenge. And there are a number of reasons for it, which are much more fundamental. And obviously here, I kind of say in the beginning, I'm a migration expert, but a lot of these challenges actually go to the field of housing. It's just the housing stock is not there. So it was very interesting by the previous speaker to hear also about these sort of the reception centers and all of this being problematic. I think what a lot of countries are afraid of is that in some countries, the reliance on private hosts has been better. In other countries, it has been worse. And the fear is in many situations that rather than entering into these long-term housing contracts and solutions, people have to actually go to these reception centers, which kind of from kind of private hosts to reception centers, because the transition is simply not there. And this is why I think the kind of the big issue is the housing stock, that it simply is not available there. And especially when we look at the countries that have taken the bulk of refugees, Poland being one example. The housing stock was strained, to say the very least, before the crisis. It has become even more so. And I think rightfully so, as the previous speakers have highlighted as well, and what OECD very stresses is that the likelihood of further flows from Ukraine is significant. Obviously, the big question of how the war evolves, so there is the possibility of those flows, but it's just the degree of infrastructural damage to the country is so significant that when we talk about housing stock, it's just enormous amounts of the housing stock have been taken out from the Ukrainian housing market. So these are in unlivable conditions, which might push the IDPs or internally displaced people to leave the country. And the IDPs are currently around 7 million. I'm happy to talk about some of the kind of the key risks that we see in the private housing as well, and in the different sort of OECD countries. I'll kind of cover them briefly, so happy to go further into any of them, but obviously there are numerous challenges, but we see three big challenges and risks. So the first, obviously, is the safety risk and the risk of exploitation. This is, as I said, I think a lot of civil society organizations, a lot of governments, they have been trying to tackle this from the beginning. So I'm not saying there isn't anything there, it just remains a challenge due to the nature of the refugee flows. The majority of arrivals are women with children. The risk of exploitation, gender-based violence, it is there, especially as they're kind of running out of their financial resources, the sort of labor exploitation risk, everything. It's a kind of broad spectrum that it comes in. But I think a lot of countries, they have been working very hard, a lot of organizations have been working very hard to kind of establish different pre-screening systems, matching procedures have been improved on the go. So the risk is there, but I think things are being done. The second big area is miscommunication and just difficulties with managing expectations. And I think this is a challenge where perhaps, you know, this Safe Homes initiative, I think has a lot of potential to kind of actually establish some ground rules that countries then can rely on. But I think on a sort of previous note as well, I think it is very important for communication to be done here. But I think here the communication really needs to be done at a national level. As the DG Home speaker told before as well, regional representatives, cities, they can play a very significant role in communicating this. But in terms of these expectations, I think because it developed on the go, it's very hard to do it differently. It's sort of like, it is one of these challenges that just emerged out of the situation. I think, you know, from the side of people who are fleeing, they were very much just seeking out any safe place to go. People who were trying to help, they did this from the goodness of their heart. But it's sort of like, once they were in this situation, I think both sides started to realize that perhaps in many instances, they weren't equipped to handle the situations. And then obviously in some countries, in some regions, organizations were very good at providing that help. So as the kind of example from Slovakia as well, the advice provided, it sort of helped to ease this. But obviously this is something that can be prevented moving forward. If this is to be a blueprint for kind of next crisis. The third challenge is more kind of forward-looking, and it is the cost of living crisis. You know, coming from the perspective of OECD as well, we work with the economic system. It's just private accommodation programs, they come with a significant cost to host. No matter how well they're organized, no matter how much funding you put out there, considering us going into this winter and the different energy costs, the inflation, it will be a major challenge that the availability of funds, they can mediate to some degree, but not sufficiently. And in some countries, in some OECD countries, governments have been providing financial support, but even then, it's just the costs are going up faster than any sort of governmental support could keep up with. So there is that. But then how to move forward? Here, I think kind of the three suggestions that OECD has made in terms of the transition. So first of all, as I already briefly talked about, it is a housing stock issue. So finding housing solutions for Ukrainian refugees in countries, it needs to be part of the long-term strategy of addressing just pre-existing housing shortages. It's not a migration issue per se, it's more a housing issue. And again, as a migration and integration expert, I trust everyone here has many good, better solutions how to kind of solve this. But this is what it is at its core. Verifying systems also have to be put in place, especially this is very much regarding the private host systems. These need to be communicated well. in many instances, the verifying systems are there, but for verification to function, both sides need to have a trust in it. So there is a kind of work needed to be done on that. And the final push that I would very much want to highlight, and not many people have touched upon this today, is the question around dispersal. It is a difficult topic, because especially from a sort of refugee point of view, I think the motivations to go to different areas, the drivers have been family contacts, the existence of a diaspora, housing availability as well. But the metropolitan areas are much more overwhelmed than any other area. So countries need to be start considering different dispersal systems. What we want to stress is that dispersal systems need to be built around employment. We are moving towards the next stage of the Ukrainian refugee crisis. We are no longer really talking about the short-term integration. We need to plan for the long-term displacement, and that needs to come with livelihood options. So I'm happy to afterwards to go further into these topics, but it is the sort of dispersal around employment options that needs to be implemented. So this is for me.
I think I'll have to stop you there, but thanks a lot. I was wondering, like, could you put a link to the briefing note or the paper that
Happy to.
Yeah, I think that would be useful for people still online. So thanks a lot. Very interesting presentation. Let's move to Katarzyna. We agree that I don't have to pronounce her or try to pronounce her last name. It's just too difficult, but she was happy to be addressed with her first name. So Katarzyna, you're the lead advocacy officer in Habitat for Humanity. From Poland, the country that is most affected by the whole Ukrainian refugee issue, refugee crisis. So would be very interested to hear from you, what is the reality on the ground in Poland? How do you see things evolving? The floor is yours for a small 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today. And yeah, just to reintroduce myself, Katarzyna Przybylska, and it's really difficult. So I'm representing Habitat for Humanity Poland, and we are part of a global network. Thanks to that, we combine local presence in Poland, because we've been here for 30 years, and support of our global network. What was amazing at the first days after the war in Ukraine emerged, and we started receiving and supporting people from Ukraine in Poland, thanks to the support of our colleagues who had experience with previous crises. It was a bit easier for us than other local NGOs in Poland to be able to start responding to the crisis. And just to give you an overview of what is going on in Poland, and I will start with some very brief statistics. According to UNHCR, in Poland, around 30% of the people from Ukraine are using the hosting accommodation solutions that we are discussing today, and around 21% rented accommodation. And this will be another main focus of mine presentation or intervention today. So those are like two elements of the puzzle that we have in place in Poland. And apart from that, collective shelters, 14% of people use them. And we heard already in April very proud information that Poland is not building camps, because everyone knows that this is not the preferred solution. But on the other hand, collective centers should be addressed, and we should be aware that a lot of people are there. And as one of my previous speakers said, there are situations and instances where people who had been with host family had to move to collective center. And this is something that should be really avoided, because being within the community with host family allows for better, faster, easier integration. And after such an experience, going to collective center, it brings the process to the very beginning, and it's something that really every neighboring country should really try to avoid. And what was really amazing for me was the openness and how people started hosting people from Ukraine in their homes. But this was also the time that should have been used to establish more systemic solutions for the mid and long-term support. And as Eva said, this is mostly housing crisis that we are facing, and it's building on the crisis that we already had in Poland. We are facing housing crisis for so many years in Poland that it's part of our situation. So apart from the activities that are being done and implementing new solutions and trying to change the system, we are still facing like severe overcrowding. We are facing a lack of affordable housing stock, and influx of people from Ukraine only made that more visible, more clear. And I think that looking on the bright side, finally, we started talking about housing in the public debate. It's such an important topic right now that everyone thinks what they can do, what should they do, or what should be done to improve the situation. Also, involvement of the private sector, it's also something very new and very interesting to observe, and this gives a great opportunity if we use this wisely in Poland. So going to more stable solutions or more long-term, more permanent housing solutions. We all, and yeah, when people were coming, we were offering them reception centers or housing with Polish families. But what should happen after that? So the systemic solution that I mentioned, well, we should have in place like access to rental market. And as you probably know, we don't have a big rental market in Poland. It used to be around 6% of the total housing market. So there is a big need of improving the rental market and making this more accessible for people coming from Ukraine. And to do that, we should just increase housing stock in Poland. As Eva said, this is the biggest challenge that I guess not only Poland, but other neighboring countries are facing. So how to do that? For example, in Poland, one solution would be to renovate vacant or underused premises. According to the statistical office, only within the Polish municipalities, there are over 70,000 vacant housing units. So this can be done pretty fastly with majority or some of the cases, and this could be done. Other thing is that according to our census last year, around 11% of the housing units in Poland are inhabited. So we should find the solutions and incentivize owners of this stock to use it right now because we need it right now, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of recommendations that I would like to make on the national and EU level to support housing situation in Poland, but I'm sure that we don't have time for it. So just to give you an example of the three-step approach, this is something that we've been doing also as an organization. So we established short-term support for people coming to Poland, and we supported the city of Warsaw with matching people coming with solidarity housing, making sure that everyone gets there safely. Apart from that, we started booking hotel rooms for people coming to Poland, because soon we realized that hosting options are a bit limited. So when there was a bigger group traveling together, they needed more space to be able to stay together. Apart from that, we started housing information line. It was also mentioned that people need access to information to get to place to ask where they can ask their questions. So that's why we started it. And we are answering to questions posed both by the refugees, but also by the host families and host community, because those people also, they need access to information, they have their concerns. And a lot of those calls from owners was, how can we support the families after they will leave our home? What we can do more to support them? And I think that really shows that the fatigue that we've mentioned, it's here and it's there, and we definitely feel it. And with the financial subsidies provided by the government supporting people for 120 days, so it came to an end for those who came in April or May. It shows that people would like to be able to do more, and the solidarity is still there, but with the overcrowding potential of hosting families for a long time, such as in Brussels, it seems impossible in many cases. So after that, we will need more midterm support, like, for example, using social rental agencies model that is already there in Polish legislation. And after that, we really need increasing affordable housing stock in Poland. And just 2 comments. I can see that you are nodding really fast, so I'm talking really fast. Cooperation and coordination, because those are really the key aspects that we need on the ground in Poland and in other neighboring countries to make this more systemic, more coordinated approach, to be really able to target the most vulnerable groups, to support people who need support, and to be able to respond really well to the current crisis. And of course, I won't go into details. We have to remember that winter is coming, so we can expect influx of people from Ukraine. We will need to support those staying in with host community, in collective centers. So a lot of challenges before us right now. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for bearing with me.
No, and sorry for giving the impression that you had to hurry up. No, but I like, really thanks for the reality check. It's good to be confronted with that from time to time. And I can assure you that we in FEANZA, also in the framework of the Housing Solutions Platform, will continue to work on this issue, and there will be plenty of opportunities to go into further detail in terms of what housing solutions, what interventions in the housing market we need. So we'll stay in contact, and we'll provide a platform where you can continue working with us. So that's what I wanted to say. So thanks for that. Talking about housing markets and the role of housing players, we now have Alice Pettini, who is the research director of Housing Europe, the Research Observatory, or the Social Housing Research Observatory. Sure that you will agree that the social housing sector has a role to play. The question is, what role can it play in the current circumstances? So we would love to hear from you. We have heard a lot about private hosting, etc. Also the role of the private market, but your chance now to convince us that the social housing sector has also a role to play. Alice, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Frick. And I suppose I have about 2 minutes, given that we're going over time. Anyway.
Yeah, no, a little bit longer, but please, like, take your time to make the argument. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. No, first of all, let me start by saying that, of course, we really welcome the Safe Home initiative, and it's an important part of the solution to the current crisis. And I think, like everyone, the show of solidarity in Europe in the light of the Ukraine refugee crisis is something that, I mean, Europe can really be proud of. But I think maybe our role here today is really to talk more in general about the need to look at the long-term solutions, and in particular, or not forgetting or keeping in the spotlight the issue of dealing with the housing affordability crisis, that it's something that pre-existed the Ukraine refugee crisis, pre-existed the COVID crisis. It's the result of decades of trends of increasing prices and to some extent disengagement from the member states from housing policies. And I think we really should not underestimate at the current extent of the lack and shortage of affordable housing. Of course, increasing homelessness, our colleagues with FEANZA would agree, is really the clearest manifestation of this. But this is also just the peak of an iceberg in a way, because especially in urban areas, if we look at cities, the number and types of households that are facing really too high costs when it comes to housing, it's increasing every day. And I will say in the current context with the cost of living crisis, this is something that it's becoming really more and more challenging. So against this background, I think it's really important to keep in mind that investing in social and affordable housing solutions for all must remain a key priority. And this is not to take away the focus from the Ukraine refugees we're talking about today, but this would really benefit everyone. Just to give you one example, because if we look at the social and affordable housing sector, we have to think there's a huge diversity of systems, of different situations across Europe. So for instance, if we look at Denmark, what happened is that the Federation of Not-for-Profit Housing Association, they were asked in March this year by the government, so how many homes can you make available to help us facing the wave of incoming refugees from Ukraine? And because the country has a well-developed, large social housing sector, also an amazing system of monitoring and data collection about the sector, basically they were very quickly able to mobilize 2,000 homes, and in 2 weeks they were all allocated to refugees. For sure, this is not enough, and even in Denmark there are problems, but it's still a best case scenario, I would say. What we also see around Europe is examples like the one we've heard today. So Ireland with a small social housing sector and a shortage of housing in general. And here, for instance, housing associations are playing a role in housing refugees, but in a way by mediating with the private sector, so trying to mobilize private homes, hotels, Airbnbs, and so on. We also heard about Brussels, which is another very interesting case. If we look at the side of the social housing sector there, what we have in Brussels is about 40,000 social housing units, and a waiting list with almost 50,000 households on it. So clearly the sector is not well equipped enough to face the current needs that are increasing. Also, I think it's important to keep in mind that some of the countries that are taking in the largest numbers of refugees from Ukraine, like Poland, we heard now, but also, for instance, the Czech Republic, are also the countries that are facing the highest increases in terms of inflation in general and energy costs in particular. So governments there, and these are also countries with notably a small social and affordable housing sector. So the governments there will really be required to make extra efforts this year and in the next year to help all sorts of households facing these problems. So I think thinking on the long term is very important, also because we were all hoping that this war would end as soon as possible, would be resolved quickly. This is not the case, but even if it ends tomorrow, what happened in Ukraine is that homes and neighborhoods were really made a target in the conflict. And I've had the chance to listen to a researcher from Ukraine a couple of weeks ago who was explaining that in total 600,000 families have lost their homes already. And this means, I mean, a huge effort for reconstruction will be needed. And this means that, of course, the people who are here today, we can expect them not to be able to go home anytime soon. They will be here to stay on the long term. So, of course, this requires, I think a risk is basically to put the responsibility on the private households, and it is a responsibility that should remain at the collective and public level, I would say. Before I stop, just one last point. Of course, we heard from DG Home, the situation with refugees from Ukraine is exceptional in terms of the size of the phenomenon, of course, but there's a lot that we can learn from the experience developed by housing providers, but also by local authorities and NGOs during the previous refugee crisis of 2015. And one of the main points or lesson learned from the social housing providers from our sector is the importance of having an integrated approach that combines housing with access to other enabling and necessary services. And this is something that we hope to see more and more also in the current context. I think I will stop here because otherwise it would take too long.
No, it was perfect, Alicia. Thanks for that. And it was important also to have the social housing perspective on this debate. I already feel some conclusions emerging from this first debate on the Safe Homes Initiative and the housing situation of Ukrainian refugees. But as planned, I will leave the making of the conclusions to the director or the Secretary General of Housing Europe, Sorka Edwards. I hope she's online. Yeah, I see her, she's online. So Sorka, up to you to summarize the conclusions of this interesting debate and presentations.
Thanks a lot, Frick, and nice to see you. And I think this short session shows just how important it is for these types of conversations, for these coming together of ideas and reactions and solutions, because we need to be very creative at this time. There's no easy way out of this situation. We have heard indeed from the different interventions, kicking off with the European Commission. And indeed, we can all have doubts about the effectiveness of the approach taken by the Commission, with a very strong focus, as was emphasised by the speakers, on the solidarity of individual households. And I think there's a lot of potential to build on this. And the philosophy behind it is to ensure that we don't have a polarization between new arrivals and locals, which we have seen in other migration waves in Europe in the past, and we still see the results of failed integration policies, even with the elections now in Sweden recently. However, I think, as has been clearly pointed out, we cannot shift the responsibility of this to private households. So we have to welcome that solidarity. We have to support that solidarity as much as we can by providing also financial assistance, by ensuring we have a guardian approach, so ensuring the safety of those hosting conditions, ensuring hosts are well financed. So really welcome that approach. However, at the same time, appreciate the limitations of that approach, and appreciate that we indeed have to take a collective responsibility and look at the midterm solutions, the long-term solutions, and the overall shortage of affordable and social housing in the background. Coupled with, of course, the need for those accompanying social measures to make sure that the integration is actually a success, not to mention the recognition of skills, as emphasized in Ursula von der Leyen's speech this week, which is very much not a minor issue. So this whole society approach we welcome, but we have to recognize the limitations, and we don't need to go for this big community, small government approach, which has serious limitations. I think that it was clearly pointed out from the OECD, from the speaker from Poland, and by my colleague Alice Pittini, the housing crisis. But I think we can also clearly see the growing recognition of that. You mentioned that some of the neighbouring states of Poland also recognize this. In fact, we see at the first meeting of housing ministers in 13 years that took place in Nice recently, we have a broad recognition that member states need to step back into this arena actively of housing policy, because there has many countries we've seen a step back by central and local governments, and we see a joint recognition of the need to reverse that approach. And we also see a growing recognition from the European Commission. So we saw even yesterday a commitment from Commissioner Schmidt of the need to massively increase investment in social and affordable housing. So we have to, I think, as a group, as a community, we have to continue these conversations and build on that political acumen. And we can see as a follow-up to Nice, so the Czech presidency will also bring together the focal points responsible for housing as a follow-up to the Nice Declaration. And the it is apparent that we cannot assume that the skills and the knowledge are actually accessible for all of the policymakers. So I think this is also an important part of our work to make sure the access to finance, access to most up-to-date effective policy options are actually available to policymakers. So I think, again, it's the start of the conversation, but some very important points being made today on the problems that we are facing and that we need to face up to. Thanks a lot, Freek, and to all of the colleagues.
Thank you so much for that, Freek. Yeah, well, we managed only to be 17 minutes late, so I think it's time to wrap up. But just to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. It is indeed a great starting point. FANSA and the Housing Solutions Platform will continue to work on this topic. We'll be glad to stay in touch with everyone, and we'll also make available the recording of this session on our website. And with that,
thank you very much.
Wishing everyone a good day.
Yep, same for me. Bye-bye. See you next time. And thanks a lot for all the contributors.